Right, I'm here at the moment with Alex Robson. He's a good friend from Morzine. We've known each other for quite a long time now, probably more than 10 years.
At least
more than that, nearly 15 years. And we are kind of catch up on just a few bits of current topic, a few thoughts and ideas about the property market in the Alps at the moment. So Alex works for
Simalt in Morzine.
As an estate agent, so well versed and family tradition as well, because your father ran a big estate agency in the UK for a number of years as well.
That's right.
So definitely well qualified to have some opinions.
Too many opinions, perhaps.
And we've decided just for your visual pleasure to clamber up this very steep slope and have this magnificent view of the Tech de Boston in the background, which is looking absolutely stunning today.
Beautiful, isn't it?
So, Alex, any thoughts? Like, what's the market like at the moment? What's your? Obviously, we had a really buoyant period post-pandemic.
Yeah, sure.
It's been a couple of years since then.
It's a much more difficult market than it was. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. It's much slower. Having come out of COVID, we had a market that was so buoyant, so incredibly. It went further than we'd been before in prices, in activity, especially towards the top end. And that lasted for about, sort of 12 to 18 months.
Probably longer than that, really, wasn't it?
Probably longer.
If you measure it in total.
Well, no, I would say it was 18 months of real activity.
Yeah, and then there was nothing left to sell.
Then the market did it. It emptied out for a while, and then it slowed down remarkably. So
at the moment, do you think it is a buyer's market, a seller's market?
I think it's a buyer's market from the point of view of there being distinctly less buyers in the market at the moment, and therefore there is no doubt about it. If you're coming out here as a cash buyer, then you're in a strong position to purchase.
Yeah. At the same time, what I always think makes it quite unique out here is that a lot of vendors don't necessarily need to sell.
There is always that problem, because you do always have that problem, is that essentially they're second homes, and they're luxury items essentially. People are keeping them as an investment, or they've used them as a family destination for a very long time, and they actually hold them very dear.
Yeah.
And they don't emotionally, they want to hold on to them. So they're not necessarily going to let them go that easily. So they do count in their minds. They've got an awful lot of emotional value and financial value as well. So they're not necessarily going to let them go at cheap prices. But it's definitely not that aspect.
Still some opportunities for some good.
Definitely some opportunities as people
to move, who can move with cash, move with certainty at the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things that we wanted to sort of talk about a little bit, like I'm sure you speak to lots of people throughout that. I normally talk about it as a journey, because quite often it is a journey for people when they decide, hey, I love skiing, I love the mountains, whether it's the summer or the winter.
Yeah.
I quite like the idea of buying a property, but I think that's the thread where it starts. It's far less defined, and it's probably far broader than when someone's moving home in the UK or wherever they're from, and they've got a much more defined, I want to live here because it's close to my work, I need a certain number of bedrooms for my family size, I need a home office, or I really want a home gym, or I don't know, quite defined. That if they went to speak to an estate agent in their home market, they already have quite a defined criteria. Whereas I'm gonna say that the majority of people, when you speak to them the first time, they probably don't know half of that. Is that?
Most people who come out here actually started their journey 7-8 years ago, when they developed a love for skiing, and then they realised that they can do it with a family, they can do it with friends. And I think it's a massive thing to suddenly realise there's a place and an activity you can all do together.
Yeah, and keep doing
it. And it can go on for a very long time, because a lot of people of older ages are skiing still. Yeah. And it is something that starts off as an idea and just develops over time. And of course there's a balance between how much it costs to go on holiday, on a weekly holiday, and owning a property. It can become a sensible purchase to buy a property instead of renting one.
Yeah.
It
if
is
you're
expensive.
using it enough.
If you're using it enough. So
Yeah.
1 week a year isn't going to cover it. But yeah, you know, if you're starting to move towards 3 weeks a year, you're already starting to talk about some serious costs on rental,
Yeah.
which can be effectively recuperated through a purchase.
Not to mention the benefit of having your own place, familiarity, somewhere to keep your belongings,
Yep.
and just the ability to really get to know somewhere. And I don't know, clamber up steep slopes like this to get amazing views. Like,
And sit in the sunshine.
the type of, like, I don't know, experiences, maybe not this bit, but in some ways is an interesting metaphor for the type of experiences you start to have if you get that familiarity with somewhere.
Absolutely.
As opposed to treating it as just a holiday for a week.
Yeah, it's a voyage of discovery. It starts off being which ski slopes you're going to go skiing on, which ones work best for your group of people, and that discovery starts there. But it goes so much further than that, because you can use this as a base to explore the region as well.
The region, yeah.
And it is a fantastic region.
Yeah.
It's an amazing region. The whole of the Alps is really interesting. It's very different everywhere you go. And then you've got different cultures. It's 50 kilometres to Italy from here.
And I mean, as the crow flies, about 3 kilometres to Switzerland.
Probably slightly less, actually.
The Swiss border is on the ridge line.
Literally just there, yeah.
No, indeed. So what, like, so people have obviously, they've, like you say, in some ways it's like a long-standing, like, passion is quite common. But what, like, I don't know, what process they often go through, or what tips, if you say to people, what do you find yourself most often saying to people when you first speak to them? Like, what are the type of questions you get asked, or what are the type of questions that you answer most commonly in those early stages, those early conversations with a new client?
So I think the kind of questions you get are mostly about location. Where should you go within a ski resort? Now, to be honest, every ski resort has its particularities. This is a beautiful area here, but it's actually, 2.7 kilometres from the centre of Morzine.
A bit more than that, actually.
It's a bit more than that.
Yeah,
it's more than that. I'm biased. Just reduce it down a bit.
Estate agent chat. I think we're just over 4 for the technical.
Well, there you go. That's how much of an estate agent. But yeah, essentially, this is really far from town by most standards. But you get to sit in an incredibly beautiful environment that's out of town. Now, it only takes 3.5 minutes to drive into the centre of town from here.
Yeah.
This is probably a little bit of an extreme example, because this is about as far as you can get out of Morzine and still be within Morzine. But location is often the thing that really, really comes up. When people come to a ski resort, they're quite often almost obsessed with
proximity to
the lifts. Now, most ski resorts don't actually offer that amount of proximity to the lifts, to be honest.
Well, one thing I always think here as well, and maybe it is, I think you have this with every ski resort to a degree, but it's definitely exacerbated with the Porte du Soleil, is that there are, like, within Morzine, as an example, Morzine Léger, there's like half a dozen different lifts that you might choose to start your day from, depending on what part of the ski area you want to ski or explore. And certainly when I used to live here, and I know it's the same for you, like, you don't go to the same lift all the time.
No, you
go
change
to
all the
different
time.
lifts depending on where you want to go, what time of year is, etc. So then the value of being a stone's throw from one lift kind of diminishes.
It diminishes over time, because you develop you get used to what you've chosen as well, by the way. It's actually very easy to jump into a car, put all your skis on the roof, get the kids into the car and drive to a lift. Most of the lifts have got decent parking. You can get there very easily. It makes your day very straightforward. Sometimes the bus can actually be a disadvantage. It can actually be more complicated to get to free children, gloves, skis and poles, onto a bus and off the other end and back to the home at the end of the day than it can be with a car. And so if you're prepared to step away from the bus routes and certain proximities, you can find locations which are very, very rewarding to live at. And I think that's really important to understand that. When you first start looking, don't be too focused just on location, because actually location is important in its feeling. How it actually feels when you step into out the door or into
as opposed to just the physical location.
Yeah, absolutely. And they all have incredibly different advantages.
I suppose also it does depend. I mean, I don't want to harp this into a conversation about, like, the benefits of renting versus the personal choice and stuff. That's something we've spoken about kind of a lot separately. But obviously, if you are going to rent it out, then because for someone renting somewhere for just a week, in some ways they're going to go through all those same decision processes, but on a much more micro level.
Yeah.
And when they're making them all that much quicker, the chances are they're going to take the convenience of
There's no doubt
close
about it.
proximity,
Yeah.
close to a lift, close to a bus route.
Yeah.
So if you want to rent it out a lot, those locations are kind of good. But I think for me, a key thing, it comes back to, I'm glad you said it right at the start of this conversation, because it's something that I always preach. You should be buying because you love spending time here and you want
Absolutely.
to come here 3-4 weeks or plus of the year.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, your primary decision should be based on where you want to spend time, not really, is it going to rent well or isn't it? I always think that should be the secondary consideration.
I think there's
in
also
an ideal world.
I think there's also this aspect that actually many renters are experienced ski resort users, and many of them will rent as long as the car is within 5 minutes of the lift.
Yeah.
And actually, in a resort like Morzine, that's fairly easy to achieve. You have to go a long way before you're 5 minutes away from the lift.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually very achievable to have a very lovely property, which isn't necessarily on the bus route, but it is very, very close time-wise and easy to do.
So that is like a mega deep dive on location. Are there any other questions that come up often or commonly, like, say, from people? What else are people concerned about?
People are concerned about maintenance of properties, renovating. How easy is it to maintain a property over time when you live in another country? Morzine particularly, we are very lucky to have lots of English and French speaking artisans who are available to work on properties all the time. In fact, it's a thriving market here. So it is not a problem to get somebody in to make changes to your property, maintain your property. It's actually fairly easy. So it's not something that I see as a major issue for ownership. It's definitely possible. Yes, all properties may need maintaining, but it's not something that's difficult in a community like this. Most of the industry of Morzine is based around maintenance, renovation and building.
Yeah.
It's not just skiing. The ski season stops and the main industry is actually property development, essentially.
Can be expensive though.
Yes, the money is there. I mean, in the mountains things are more expensive than they are in other places. Luckily, with that actually does come quite a good bit of quality. So the artisans here are traditionally quite good at what they do, and probably worth the extra money, to be honest.
So something else that we talked a little bit about, I feel like we've talked about quite a bit over the years, that we said we'd bring up today, was I don't know, the balance between, because I think people doing work on a property is quite common. Like, it's quite obvious that when you purchase something new, assuming it's not a brand new build, the chances are, there's going to be a few bits that could do with a refresh or a renovation anyway.
Yep.
That kind of is par for the course. But it's also pretty common that people want to put their own stamp on it.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I think I've seen more and more lately, though, is that people often, I don't know, they can be maybe a little bit too quick to dismiss what's already there and what they're buying.
Yeah, very much the case that people are coming in and doing almost a strip and renovate without almost considering the elements of the building which made them want to buy it in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think that losing that character actually is detrimental to the way it's going to feel over time and probably to its value as well.
Yeah.
So maintaining character in a building is important for your use of it and for your love of it, as it for its attractiveness and its resale value later on. Because I think the trap you can fall into is that everybody falls into the same interior design brief of grey old wood and slightly old looking orange lights, which actually don't light the place very well, because that's what we see a lot of online.
Yeah.
Actually,
that's like the Pinterest trap. Or
it's a Pinterest trap, exactly.
Instagram trap, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. It's very easy to design like that. And yes, these things look good and they feel comfortable, but do they look good and feel comfortable because you're seeing them a lot?
Yeah.
Not because actually you're creating something which is yours.
I think something that we obviously see that an awful lot with properties that have just been renovated, that where we get approached to maybe offer some opinion on the ongoing rental or the management of the property. And, some of them are done to an extremely high standard, but I do see a lot where it's very obvious people have spent extremely significant sums of money to achieve like what is a very nice result, but it's also quite a mainstream result that doesn't
There's
necessarily...
no doubt about it. They're definitely following a curve, a design curve which has been repeated. And of course the artisans find it easy because once they've followed that curve, they can keep reproducing it.
I think something that's interesting to me, like coming back to the, do it because you're passionate about the location. Financial pressure is something I talk to owners a lot about as well, because keeping the balance point right is important. And I often think that people put more pressure on themselves than they need to by sometimes taking on too much renovation expense. They can quite quickly think, we'll just do a quick refresh. That's maybe 100,000 euros, 500,000, €1 million later, where they've completely gutted and completely redone somewhere, and all of a sudden the economics of the ownership look entirely different. And I think there's a lot of examples of properties in ski resorts that have some real charm from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and yes, they're a little bit tired, but perhaps if you went into it with the approach of, can we renovate? Can we work with that 60s style and like update that? Because I've seen that done really successfully in some occasions. And often that leads to a far more unique property at the end of it.
There's no doubt about it.
As opposed to a cookie cutter. And if you can achieve that, you've got something really unique, really special, and you've probably spent a lot less money doing it as well. That's something I don't know, I'd like to see people take that mindset a little bit more with property.
I think actually the weird thing is actually when we go to the UK, because the housing stock is generally older, especially in towns like Bath and Bristol where you've got houses which are 200, 300 years old, people actually embrace that quite a lot. And then they come to a ski resort and they don't embrace it at all. They just go straight for whatever's coming out the box.
New brosse.
Brosse wood. The old brosse wood, all the old recuperated wood which you end up everywhere. And I think it's a shame actually, because there are many different approaches to this. I saw a renovation last week of an apartment that was done very, very, very well. And I have to say it was slightly cookie cutter-ish, but the elements that made it individual made it feel very, very comfortable. And I was very impressed because it was in an old 60s building, which quite frankly was ugly before I went there. The apartment, when I saw it last time,
didn't do anything for you.
It did nothing for me at all. It was many rooms divided into little boxes. It basically wasn't functional. And it has been turned into a really functional apartment that's very comfortable within the envelope of a 60s built building. And it's very nice. And I think I would have liked to see a bit more character from that apartment. And I think it was possible, but again, it worked relatively well. But it would be interesting to see even more character, more diversity in the finishing, the interior designs that we've got in property. And there's no doubt about it, when they're distinct and comfortable, but also have that practical functional side, there's more value.
Yeah. So, closing thought on that kind of area, just sort of a personal, just because it's a personal passion, I'm really fond of like mid-century design, and some of the biggest mid-century designers, Charlotte Perrins is probably the person that springs most to mind, who worked a lot with Le Corbusier and people like that. But she designed whole ski resorts, and huge swathes of the fabric that we have in the Alps come from that era. So in that regard, that history that we have here in the mountains, I always find it quite somewhere between bizarre, but if I'm honest, probably a little bit sad in some ways that doesn't get experienced in quite, or doesn't, experienced, respected, appreciated, maybe in the way it should. One of my favourite hotels in Avoria is the Dromont, which is obviously the original, I don't know where it's built, like 1960.
It would have been in the 60s,
early 60s, something like that. It's literally the original building. When they renovated that in about 2013, something like that, they did that to the original style. And it is still like you walk in there and you know expect to see Sean Connery or Austin Powers coming around the corner or something like that. But I find it so utterly refreshing compared to most of the other places. I really enjoy that. I'd definitely like to see more of that in the Alps.
I sold a property a few years ago now. It must have been about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a pure 60s build chalet, quite close to the centre of Morzine, and the owners walked in and their brief was, this has got so much excellent character to work with and we want to preserve it. And they did something with it that made it really, really distinct. And it sold for a very, very healthy price as a result. And it sold quickly.
After they redid it.
After they redid it, yeah. It went on the market on Friday morning, and by Sunday it was sold.
Which is pretty rare out here, actually.
It's quite rare out here because it takes a long time to sell things.
It's generally a bit slower than.
Yeah, average transaction time really is 3 to 9 months in general for a property on the market to find a buyer. And to see that happen so fast. And a location, actually, you know, it was actually on the main road. Some people don't like that, but it was so unique. Beautifully well done, unique. They'd even taken all the old radiators, stripped the white paint off them and stripped them back to black, and then resprayed them so that they looked absolutely period and original. Yeah, absolutely authentic. And it worked incredibly well. The floors were done in wood block flooring. And it was combined with a modern kitchen and modern toilets, baths, but everything had a sort of reflection back to that era.
Yeah.
And it worked so well.
So another piece of news this week, which I picked up on a few days ago, and I think it's literally kind of breaking at the moment, is you can kind of say our neighbours over in Chamonix, because it's only like a couple of valleys over that way, so it's very nearby, part of the Haute-Savoie as well, so same department. So in Chamonix, they are going to I haven't read this in all the detail, but my understanding is that they are going to block new building permits essentially for second homes and hotels. So they will only be approving new building permits for accommodation for local residents that's going to be occupied, in principle on an annual basis. If you're putting in an application to build a new build that is a luxury chalet or a block of apartments that's going to be sold for second homes and for seasonal usage, short-term lets, the answer is no, we've got enough of that.
Yeah.
So the stat that the Mairie have published is that 70% of the property and accommodation within the resort is used in that way.
Yeah.
And that therefore it's making it increasingly hard and unsustainable for anyone to live there year round, for anyone to live there, to move there. It's making it harder for seasonal. So something that I found quite interesting on it, they did pull out seasonal workers and they included them in the kind of local residents catch bucket. So they were in the sort of protected arena of seasonal workers have got nowhere to live either, which I think that resonates with me a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, really interesting news. It's something that kind of, I don't know, people will maybe have some familiarity with the concept of development and purchases being limited in some regards in certain parts of Switzerland, but it's not something that I'm not aware that we've seen it in the French Alps before.
No, I mean, there are definitely communes in France which have done it before. And it was always going to come to the ski resorts. And I think principally because of the problem with saisonniers, actually.
What, as in the problem being?
The problem being there's nowhere for them to live.
Yeah.
I'm fairly conflicted on this issue. Instinctively, I don't like the idea of it because I find it might have consequences that we're not thinking about. So I do feel that possibly they haven't thought it through enough. Essentially, a ski resort is a ski resort. It's a functioning commercial entity which is based around short-term letting.
Yeah. about tourism.
About tourism, and Chamonix is a little bit different because it is very much a year-round, almost a city in the mountains. It is very, very much a place where a lot of people live all year round.
It's definitely a little bit more commercial and a bit more cosmopolitan in that regard, but it's still a tourist centre at the end of the day.
It's still a massive, in fact, it's the biggest tourist centre, we can't deny that. But its infrastructure is definitely much bigger than many of the other resorts. I mean, it has a mountain college, effectively. It's got a school system. It's got an awful lot going on in Chamonix, which
a lot of resorts don't have.
A lot of resorts don't have. So it's slightly different application.
It's got a greater need for year-round residential population.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think, like you say, for seasonal workers, but there are people. You know, I know that from our point of view, trying to locate seasonal accommodation has got more and more difficult and more expensive year on year. We also find now that whereas 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was always a pool of local resource, you know, who were looking for seasonal work, whether that was supporting in office jobs, but also in transport, driving, or even just basic things like housekeeping. There was that constant body of people. They tended to change and evolve. People would come for a few years and then move on, but it was always there. Right now, 2025,
they're not there anymore.
They're not there.
They're not there anymore.
And I mean, the pandemic probably had part to do with that, because definitely some people left, but I think one of the reasons that they haven't come back is it's not really viable.
Well, a lot of it's obviously the limitations on and the difficulty of staying within Europe for more than 90 days. That's become an element.
If you're talking about Brits, yeah, but I think that, you know, people that wasn't just Brits in that mode. There were other Europeans as well. European nationals.
But in Morzine, it was essentially a very, very British. A lot of them were British, and now most of them aren't staying here for long term at all. The only Brits that are here now are the ones like me who've been here for 25 years, and we have seen that actually the village has changed because young people can't stay here for a long period of time anymore. They can't basically decide to make this their home. It's much more difficult. It's
more difficult, as you say. They can do that, but it's definitely they can't do it accidentally, should we say? It has to be. It's a bit more effort.
Yeah, definitely not happening accidentally. I'm definitely an accidental.
I'm 20+
serving a life sentence.
Yeah, with kids having grown up here, French passports,
French wife, and all of that. But I think there's lots of complicated elements to that argument about tourism, and we're seeing it in Spain and Portugal as well. This conflict of tourism versus residential is a major topic everywhere where tourism has become more and more popular, and it's understandable because tourism is very dominant of the place it goes to. There's no doubt about it. You can't just step away from it. It's not something that just suddenly you can turn it off one day, and it presents so many challenges. One of the challenges, I think, is definitely residential living all year round. Again, as I said, I'm conflicted. I just think the consequences are going to be possibly the opposite to what we think they should be.
I mean, we should dig into that. Like, logically for me, I mean, it's going to be, you would expect it to actually increase the value of existing properties on good plots, good size and good locations. They surely are going to steadily go up in price.
So oddly, I would say that I'm one of the people that a long time ago has always said, why don't we stop the permits? And essentially, by doing that, force the renovation of our existing properties.
And to be fair, Chamonix that is something in their release that they reference, because they reference sustainability and renovation and redevelop, you know, from an environmental perspective of not just demolish and rebuild, but restoration and preservation of the existing housing stock.
So
they do reference that is one of their stated objectives with this move.
Yeah, and I agree with it. I mean, I've been saying it for a very long time. I am not pro large apartment block developments. I find that they are very, very noisy in development. They're also dimensionally, they are much bigger than the housing stock that's already here, and I think that they cause huge changes to the feel of a ski resort.
Well, they can bring in, like, I don't know, 50, 60 empty units in one.
Yeah, and
one
some
hit.
of them are, some of them are even bigger.
Yeah.
And in the last 10 years, there's been a huge amounts of that in all the resorts.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of that.
And a lot of it has been literally dropping this enormous building. It looks like it's from outer space, having just removed what is essentially a small family home. And for the people that live here, it's a shock. Now, it's part of the process. It's part of the economic development of a ski resort. But there's a point at which that's now become abusive. There's no doubt about it. It's changing the resorts almost too much. And I think that's a problem. And I think there's part of that approach will address that. There's no doubt Morzine, we're seeing a shift now. We are definitely seeing a shift away from just build what you want wherever you want.
Well, I was going to say, actually, when earlier we spoke about the fact that post-pandemic boom led to almost a sellout of available stock, which then led to mass commencement of building projects. Yeah. Because we've seen a huge amount of that kick off. And ironically, sort of my opinion now is that is almost leading to a saturation of stock.
Yes.
Because there's a huge amount of unsold, either still in the development process of off plan, or actually finished and complete and just not sold.
Yeah.
There's loads of property that's, whether that's an apartment or chalet, you can almost like pick your mark from studio through to 5-6 bed luxury property at 5-6 million plus. Pick any realm there, and there's almost certainly something on the market that's yet to find a buyer.
At the moment, particularly that is
evolution's kind of is an interesting cycle, and I kind of think obviously we will see that normalise over the next few years.
Yeah. And the Mary and Morzine, there's no doubt of it. By the end of the year, we're going to see changes to the building regulations, which are very, very restrictive. In my opinion, actually, now we're going to go the opposite way. We're actually going to be too restrictive. Before, we were definitely too liberal, allowing large development groups to come into the ski resorts and build these huge buildings. Actually, now we're going to push back so hard that even medium-sized chalets are going to be a challenge.
There's a lot of, something that I think is happening again across. Well, you were right. So we're kind of seeing it across the world, in Spain and other countries as well. But on a localized level, this is such a hot topic that it even led to the ousting of the mairie, the entire basically local government within Morzine.
Yeah,
12 months ago, they were essentially thrown out because of mass discontent with their management of this issue. So it's definitely political, which logically is going to lead to the new party.
The pushback is enormous, and there's no doubt about it in my mind that they're actually now going to go too far in the other way. I don't know how.
They might not. The
rules are fairly restrictive.
It's politics, so they probably will do that. That's
no,
how it works,
in my opinion, it has gone in because they're restricting the biggest thing that they're doing actually is imposing social housing quotas on even quite small projects.
Yeah.
Which is admirable in one sense, but also creates enormous financial problems for the affordability of projects like that. Yeah. And when you're building an individual home, 5-bedroom home, you're not going to build 3 social housing units on the side of your chalet. No, and if you did, the value that you get for your property is going to go down a lot.
I guess to try and take a neutral stance there depends on how big and how valuable the 5-bedroom home is, because
for sure we're getting
the extreme end of the spectrum. If it's sort of 700-800 meters squared and worth many millions, then it is arguably more of a commercial project. And I sort of bite my tongue a little bit as a man that helps to manage and look after plenty of that sort of building. So I don't want to alienate that kind of, that's very integral to the type of property we manage. But I can definitely understand both sides to that argument. I think what's important is that slide that back down to something that is somewhat more mainstream, in the context that this isn't a particularly mainstream industry.
No.
That finding the right balance point where that line goes is quite sensitive and quite important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, right, Moss is he's going to tell me off for rambling away and how long this edit is, which is what he usually does. So let's try and do a rapid, quick fire cutaway on some questions. So you've got to give fairly sharp, immediate answers. So
this could go horribly wrong.
It could get horribly wrong. Let's try it. So Chamonix's decision to restrict the development of new planning applications for second homes in the context of Chamonix, right decision, wrong decision?
I'm going to go with it being the wrong decision, as I feel it's slightly too extreme, and I think there's a balance to be had.
Okay, so my next question was going to be, well, first of all, do you think that other places, or specifically, do you think the local mairies in Morzine and Léger will also consider bringing in similar measures and controls?
I would say that they're already talking about it. Absolutely. I think it's a reality that those issues have been brought up in the mairie. They've already been discussed, and they are already talking about how they're going to have impacts upon their communities.
Do you think they should do it?
Again, I'm conflicted. I think there's a balance to be made. The truth is, I sound like a snob whenever I say this, but a town like Morzine has always been a town mainly of small to medium-sized chalets. And I think that when we develop rules for building here, we should continue to focus on the character of the town, which is small to medium-sized chalets. Yes, within that, there's going to be some bigger ones. Unfortunately, the French planning system is very much a box. If you fit in it, you can do what you want. And there's no case by case. Literally no case by case in France, which actually I think is a problem, because there's some rules that have come out since. I can take a very small example of parking. You now cannot build a covered parking next to your house. It has to be 3 meters away. But of course that doesn't...
joined. I think if it touches or is part of it, it's okay,
yeah,
isn't it?
it's no.
There's something similar where you're allowed to build on your boundary, or you have to be like 3 meters away from it.
Yeah, yeah,
1 meter away from
absolutely.
it. No, but you can touch it.
Yeah, it absolutely. So there's some very strange nuances which are actually restricting the ability to renovate new property, because actually, if you cannot meet the parking requirements now, you cannot put in bigger windows into your house.
You're terrible at yes, no.
Oh yeah, I'm really bad at that, aren't I? Sorry.
I'm gonna answer for you that seeing as you thought it was the wrong decision in Chamonix, you implicitly must think it's the wrong decision.
Yeah, I think it needs really deep reflection, and actually I think case by case planning is probably a better approach. Unfortunately, more open to corruption, but it could possibly be a better model for somewhere like Morzine.
Cool, interesting. That one's going to rumble, no doubt, because literally, I mean, on the day that we're recording this, I think that was only officially announced like 3 or 4 days ago. So there's clearly going to be a lot more discussion about that. I think what you said about the fact that other local mairies and governments are already kind of, if they weren't talking about it before, they quite obviously will be talking about it now. So yeah, an interesting time. I don't know what that means for someone who's about to start or embark on their property journey at the moment. I don't know, I'd probably say don't procrastinate. Get on with it.
Get on with it. Also, I think that now we are heading towards the time for looking at existing properties and renovating them, and I think there's no doubt about it that can be a positive thing for our ski resorts, because renovation it employs a lot of people. And part of this discussion is actually we need people to have jobs in ski resorts as well, that aren't just during the season. They need to be working all year round. I mean, I couldn't live here if I just worked for 5 months a year. And it goes the same for electricians and plumbers and painters and plasterers. They all need jobs that go all year round. And so we have to be careful in the development of our approach to this. At the same time, we're not shutting down industries which actually employ locals, because it's all very well saying there's no accommodation for locals, but actually the other point is that we need industries which supply locals with money and the ability to be able to afford to stay here. Now, there's a conflict within that as well. This could go on forever, but yeah, when I say I'm conflicted, my brain changes pretty much once every 4 hours on the subject.
There's different angles. I think the final thing that actually I'd thought of earlier, which I was kind of intended to bring up and haven't, but something that I think is On the subject of like the lack of local accommodation, the lack of seasonal accommodation, and the reason why that plays, obviously I think it's quite obvious why that would play on the mind of a local community, and therefore why that would play on the mind of local government. In terms of why actually it should be something that a second homeowner thinks about as well, something that we get questioned a lot on by owners and properties we manage, or people that we advise and we talk to on that, is like why it costs so much now to kind of do anything, to manage anything. Particularly, one of the things that people really don't, that they struggle to understand, is the lack of availability of resource to perform basic like housekeeping type tasks, particularly over peak periods. It's very hard to grasp of, surely there are communities who, if minimum wage is 12 euros an hour or something like that at the moment in France, surely at 20 euros an hour there's somebody that would love that job. The reality is there isn't here.
No.
That 20 euros an hour isn't enough, anywhere near enough to live here.
No, it's absolutely not.
And therefore they're not here anymore. So it's not 20 euros an hour. To be honest, at the moment, it's rarely even 30 euros an hour. It's normally north of that, which then only exacerbates further during the peak weeks of the season. So without trying to unpick all that, for me, that was just it's an interesting example of where factors which can seem one for like local communities, and maybe things that as a second homeowner you're not necessarily immediately dialed in on, but they do have a bearing on your ownership experience as a second homeowner and as a tourist. They are going to be a factor on you. So in that regard, I think it's good to talk about it, and I think it's good to try and consider all angles. And I think the more that everyone can talk about that, whether they're like elected local friendship officials, business managers, estate agents, I think or potential investors, I think the more that we can all talk about that and try and understand the different positions and find that equilibrium, that's got to be a good thing.
Absolutely. But at the end of the day, purchasing a second home abroad is always a positive for that economy.
Yeah.
For that local economy, it is a driver. Especially, I sold a property last year and I walked into it 5 weeks after it's been sold, and there were 16 people working in that property. Yeah. And they were working there for 3 or 4 weeks. That was providing large amounts of employment, people who live here. Yeah. And I think that, there's almost a sense of guilt now when we talk about second homes abroad in Europe. I don't think you should have that guilt at all. I think it's a driver. It's positive. I think it's a really, really good thing to do. It's good for your family. It's good for you, and it's great for us who live here. We need you.
I bet you get some comments on that on this video. Anyway, thank you, Alex.
It's a pleasure.
That was fun. How was your seat? Comfortable?
It's very comfortable. Actually, I might take it home with me.
Yeah, nice bit of slate.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's pretty portable. Look, carry this home.
And with that, thank you very much.